General Saltzman, if a constituent of mine asks, why would we spend $25 or even $500 billion on Golden Dome, what would be your answer?
The system of systems includes sensors that detect missile warning, which is vital to Homeland Defense. The data transport layer that will underpin Golden Dome is going to be vital for a number of mission functions around the world. And it's that final piece where we try to protect the homeland with interceptors that I think is vital.
And the question I might have is whether or not we are trying to defend our satellites in orbit as well.
We are working as hard as we can to make sure that the satellites that we have on orbit that we depend on are as resilient to attack as possible, and then also being able to use counterspace capabilities to impose costs on anybody that would try to attack our satellites.
We'll certainly work as hard as we can on that. We will look to that and look at the ability and how fast the phenomenologies from the other domains will come on, and we will deal with these hard decisions that will have to be made by the Department of Defense.
General Saltzman, can you speak to that just in terms of when you might expect the delivery of the space-based AMTI?
Well, we're already evaluating data to include our own kind of government-based evaluations of the data, as well as what some of the vendors are telling us the data looks like. It's promising. And then you have to put together the right contract vehicle to launch the satellites in a time and place. So I think by the end of the decade, you will start to see capability delivering data. I won't say that that's accomplishing the mission by 29. I think General Gutlein's assessment that this is an early 30s delivery of a real capability is not too far off.
Yeah. Just recognizing the very tenuous situation that we are in right now and the need truly for speed on all of this, we get that, but we've got to be honest. If we're going to be facing some gaps that are going to allow for a level of exposure, we're talking about spending a lot of money on a lot of different initiatives that are quite significant.
Future conflicts will be centrally waged in the air, information, and space domains, and we are not doing enough to keep up with the pace of the threats and the pace of the opportunity brought by innovation in the private sector.
Your testimony on the President's budget request for the Air Force and Space Force for fiscal 26. I'll begin by welcoming the Secretary of the Air Force, Troy Meink, Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General David Allvin, and Chief of Space Force Operations, General Saltzman. Thanks to each of you for your decades of service to our country. Thanks as well to the airmen and guardians that you all lead. This weekend's successful operations over Iran served as a reminder of the immense skill and professionalism of America's men and women in uniform. Pilots operating coolly in enemy airspace, dozens of aircraft and thousands of personnel helping to get them safely over their targets. Massively powerful ordnance delivered with the utmost precision, and all flights returning home safely. The way I see it, there are two key takeaways here. The first one is the value of allies and partners. Israel's magnificent military and intelligence operations created the strategic opportunity. In degrading Iran's air defenses, the Israelis demonstrated how highly competent allies act as force multipliers in the face of common threats. We ought to keep this in mind when we look at Europe and the Indo-Pacific as well. Allies and partners are going to be essential to any big fight, and we should not underestimate their value. Of course, at the end of the day, nobody in the world but the U.S. Air Force can do what you did this weekend. America's ability to project power globally is unparalleled. And that brings me to the second takeaway. Military primacy simply doesn't happen overnight. The most sophisticated military in world history is the product of trillions of dollars over decades. Sustaining this military force isn't cheap. Modernizing it to preserve our military edge is even more expensive. But if we value the lives of our service members, the unprecedented peace we've experienced since World War II, and the fruits of American-led international order, then it's worth every single penny and then some. America's most determined adversaries have studied the capabilities and the tactics of our military closely and have developed advanced radars, sensors, and long-range air defenses to counter precisely the strength that we showed last weekend. The PRC has been playing a long game to challenge American primacy. By contrast, in crucial ways, we've been taking our edge for granted. Chronic underfunding of the national defense has become a habit of consecutive administrations. Unfortunately, the budget we're here to discuss today is no exception. In fact, the President's request for fiscal 26 falls well short of meeting the requirements imposed by today's threat landscape. We simply will not keep pace with the pacing threat of China if we're not even willing to keep pace with inflation. The Air Force needs to modernize its bomber and fighter fleets. It needs new tankers and command and control aircraft. It also needs longer range and more sophisticated munitions, and it needs a lot of them. The Space Force needs advanced satellite technologies, resilient communication systems, and enhanced surveillance capabilities to deter aggression, ensure a freedom of maneuver, and to maintain uninterrupted space-based support to joint and allied forces back on planet Earth. And you can't do any of it with anemic-based budgets. You just can't. Preserving our military edge and the peace will require sustained and significant increases in defense spending, not just a one-time infusion. But it's not just the size of fiscal 26 request many of us are concerned about. It's also the structure of the request. Administrations asked Congress to split the funds for massive procurement efforts like B-21 and Sentinel between the base budget and the reconciliation bill. I struggle to understand how putting programs with broad bipartisan support in a simple majority partisan reconciliation bill won't function like a shell game for avoiding making the sort of annual base budget investments we begged the last administration to make. The need for stable production of aircraft seems to argue for year-on-year funding baked into the base budget. The constrained top line, of course, is forcing services to make artificially tough choices. In your case, let me just say this. We all want to go to space, but let's be honest about the risks and trade-offs this request is forcing you to make. If the choice you're facing is between an available advanced airborne system with onboard battle management and a nascent space capability, you're going to have to resist the urge to turn proven capabilities like E-7 into bill payers. There's value in redundancy. We should be making investments in both airborne and space-based command and control. They say that in space, no one can hear you scream. But squandering our advantage in this critical domain because we can't find the political will to maintain it. That would mean plenty of screaming here on Earth with devastating consequences for U.S. military operations on land, air, and sea. So I hope we'll also hear from you about how the Air Force is addressing munitions shortfalls, not just in the massive ordnance penetrators deployed this weekend to great effect, but across the entire spectrum of both offensive and defensive capabilities on which Air Force operations are built. I've been hoping to hear from each service how production challenges are being addressed, and the Air Force will be no exception. Speaking of the MOP, I need to address the manufactured controversy over the extent to which the strikes damage Iran's nuclear program. We haven't been briefed on the intelligence, but the political hand-wringing actually misses an important point. We've demonstrated our military superiority. If we want, we can own the skies over Iran. If the Iranians don't abandon their nuclear program, we can hit them again. And Iran's remaining leaders should take the off-ramp the president has offered them. Finally, I'll ask you to explain for us the lessons you're taking from conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East. How has the rapid evolution of unmanned systems informed the decisions you make about drone operations, force protection, and interception? And what information are you getting today that you'd lose if America neglected its relationships with force-multiplying allies and partners? Look forward to your testimony on each of these fronts in a moment, but first, Senator Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Meink, General Allvin, General Saltzman, for appearing with us today and for your service. I am the senior senator from the state of Delaware, which hosts Dover Air Force Base, which is a critical part of our state, our history, and our community. And I'm looking forward to discussing how we can work together to support the Air Force and Space Force's critical missions and to support the brave airmen and guardians who sacrifice so much in service to our nation. Mr. Secretary, General Allvin, General Saltzman, I'll begin by saying my thoughts and prayers this weekend have been with the airmen at Al Udeid in Qatar and all other targeted personnel in CENTCOM, and to express my gratitude for those who serve and carry out missions on behalf of our nation. The Air Force has done a tremendous job of protecting our partners and the joint force in a turbulent region. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to remind all of us that our service members and civilians stationed in the region continue to put their lives on the line in the service of our national defense. I have just returned from the NATO summit, and I think it was a significant step forward for all 32 NATO allies to commit to a 10-year goal of 5% of GDP in investment for defense. But across all the conversations that my colleagues and I had with defense ministers, foreign ministers, heads of state, there was a consistent theme. Spending more money in and of itself will not achieve our shared goals. Spending it more wisely, coordinating better, delivering capabilities rather than just throwing more on the pile in Europe will be critical to our achieving shared goals of improved surveillance, improved resilience, better coordination, better communications, and better preparation for an increasingly dangerous world. On a recent bipartisan trip to the Philippines and Taiwan, very similar conversations. So you have critical missions in front of you. And just as the men and women of the Air Force and the Space Force show up day in and day out to do their jobs, I think we owe it to them to do the same. And for those of us here in the Senate to fulfill our constitutional duty to conduct thorough oversight of federal spending and of your strategic plans. Leaders across administrations have shared a consistent message with this subcommittee over the past few years. Future conflicts will be centrally waged in the air, information, and space domains, and we are not doing enough to keep up with the pace of the threats and the pace of the opportunity brought by innovation in the private sector. So as we meet today to consider your fiscal 2026 year request, I'm concerned this budget appears to lack sufficient detail and prioritizes some politically charged issues and fails to meaningfully address some of the enduring challenges past leaders have warned about. In this, I largely agree with what the chairman has just said. Just to give one example, the FY25 continuing resolution provided resources to procure 62 fighter aircraft, but your base budget request only includes enough for 24. The Department of the Air Force has moved $6 billion in crucial nuclear modernization spending for B-21 bomber and Sentinel programs to reconciliation spending, while also stating that these are no-fail missions. Since fiscal 22, Congress has provided significant needed increases to continue the E-7 program, which will provide critical airborne warning capabilities that our allies have already fielded. Your submitted budget zeroes this capability out. Looking at these, some might question if the Air Force is still interested in cutting-edge planes. The Space Force budget has similar hard choices. Fiscal year 25, continuing resolution enacted $18.6 billion for research and development spending for the Space Force, but the fiscal year 26 base request is only $15.5 billion. I'm very concerned by how this budget is prioritized overall and where you've decided to take on additional risk. We've heard witnesses across several of our hearings explain these risks by arguing one budget, two requests. And I'll agree with the chairman that putting critical base budget bipartisan priorities into reconciliation risks a long-term shell game. As I've observed before, budget reconciliation is a gamble that ties our national defense to whether Congress will support tax cuts for billionaires and cuts to health care. And I think it doesn't serve the long-term interests of the Department of the Air Force and the Space Force and our national defense. It rather raises questions for our allies and our adversaries about whether we are committed to these programs in the long term and erodes the certainty necessary for industry to make its critical and timely investments. Bluntly, all of this is before we get to the more partisan question of the Air Force spending hundreds of millions of dollars to retrofit a used Qatari jet as a vanity project for a president unhappy with the contract that he himself negotiated a few years ago. I think the president should take responsibility for managing this project more appropriately and his ego associated with it. But frankly, the Air Force is in the hard position of having to defend and explain its budget and priorities. So I hope today's discussion can demonstrate the Department of the Air Force has real challenges and real answers for it. I think the best way to deal with this is by rejecting political imperatives and thinking first about the security needs of the airmen and the guardians in the Middle East and Asia and Europe and here in the United States. As their elected leaders, we should be making decisions based on real threats and real needs and finding ways to solve those problems. I'm ready to do so with the chairman, members of this subcommittee, anyone willing to work with us in good faith to find a long-term solution to your pressing issues that contribute so centrally to our national security. Thank you again for your testimony today. I look forward to your responses, and I look forward to working with the chairman as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Coons. Now I would like to invite each of our witnesses to make a brief opening statement, beginning with Secretary Meink, followed by General Allvin, and then General Saltzman. Go right ahead.
Thank you. Chairman McConnell, Ranking Member Coons, Chair Collins, Vice Chair Murray, and distinguished members of the committee. General Allvin, General Saltzman, and I would like to thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the Department of the Air Force concerning the FY26 budget request. The Department of the Air Force is at an inflection point. We are engaged in a fast-paced race for military superiority against a well-resourced strategic opponent. We simultaneously face personnel and platform challenges affecting our immediate readiness. We must also balance our requirement to generate readiness today with the requirements to deter our adversaries in the future and, if necessary, win decisively in conflict. The scope and severity of the threats to our homeland and our national interest are significant and increasing, and we now face one of the most dangerous security environments in our history. The Department of the Air Force has structured our long-term strategy around the belief that China is our pacing threat, and this reality directly affects the department's fiscal priorities. Defending the homeland is the Department of the Air Force's top priority. We will do so by continuing to modernize our nuclear forces, especially through the Sentinel, B-21, long-range standoff weapons program, as well as the nuclear command and control and communication that support these systems. We are also eager to support the President's Golden Dome for America, in which the Department of the Air Force will be a primary stakeholder. Our next priority is to deter China. While many other threats remain, as we have seen recently in the Middle East, we believe that focusing on China will posture us for success in any theater. We will deter China through investments in our people, our readiness, and our posture within the Indo-Pacific region. We believe that our people are one of our nation's key competitive advantages. We are working to train our airmen and guardians to confront the brutal challenges that warfare without sanctuary presents. We are emphasizing readiness standards by creating new inspections, assessments, and exercises geared towards preparing our personnel for this environment. Finally, we are strengthening our posture within the Indo-Pacific region, conducting high-level operational exercises that will test our ability to deploy and operate from austere environments. Lastly, the Department of the Air Force is prepared to provide critical capabilities and forces to the joint warfighter in order to defeat our adversary if deterrence fails. Through our current and future investments, the Department aims to establish a balanced, high-low mix of combat capabilities optimized to project power both from within and outside the adversary's threat environments. We recently demonstrated that precision and potency of the U.S. Air and Space Force by Operation Midnight Thunder. And it's an imperative that we continue providing the President with a full range of military options to confront any threat we face. The Department of the Air Force is also looking to improve efficiencies wherever possible. We also recognize our need and responsibility to pass a clean audit as soon as possible, and we are working hard to make that a reality. The Department of the Air Force is extremely proud of all of our airmen and guardians defending our nation and its interest every hour of every day. We commit to working with this committee to secure the FY26 budget request, which will directly support our airmen and our guardians in their uncompromising mission. We thank you for your time and look forward to your questions.
Well, good morning, Chairman McConnell, Ranking Member Coons, and distinguished members of this committee. I'm proud to represent the 677,000 total force airmen serving our nation today. We thank you for your support, not only for those airmen, but for their families as well. I'd like to open by expressing my immense pride in the exemplary performance of our airmen in securing our homeland and deployed worldwide. From the Indo-Pacific to the Middle East or our southern border, they work around the clock to deliver air power anytime, anywhere. The most striking example occurred last weekend when our speed, range, precision, and lethality were on display over the skies of Iran. The strategic landscape has shifted dramatically. We now operate in a world where the PRC is rapidly modernizing its military with a clear intent to reshape the international order, to include a nuclear breakout that demands unmatched deterrence capabilities. In parallel, we are seeing unprecedented threats to our homeland. Our mission is clear: maintain air power dominance to safeguard our security. To achieve peace through strength, we must adapt and evolve. Our Air Force has three enduring priorities. First, we must defend the homeland. Air and missile threats are evolving, and the ability to detect, track, and defeat those threats in real time is foundational to our national defense and is non-negotiable. Simultaneously, the U.S. Air Force provides reliable, effective, and safe nuclear deterrent that is the backbone of strategic stability. These priorities are paramount, cannot fail, and must be given equal weight. Finally, we must project power globally, either independently or as part of a joint force, to rapidly respond anywhere to deter aggression and win. This is what makes our Air Force unique, and it is needed now more than ever. To achieve these priorities, we're asking for sustained support for modernization and the development of new capabilities. The FY26 budget request is designed to build a force aligned with today's operational realities. That means preserving current readiness and optimizing our force design to be tailored for contested environments, blending next-generation aircraft, autonomous systems, and resilient command and control. Our modernization efforts include the continued development of the F-47, the integration of collaborative combat aircraft, and we are also upgrading the F-35 and F-15. These platforms are critical to retaining the edge our warfighters need. Nuclear modernization remains top priority, with funding directed towards the Sentinel program, the B-21 Raider, and revitalizing the B-52 fleet. These systems will anchor our strategic deterrent for decades. Equally important is investment in our airmen. We are seeing record recruitment and have reached our annual targets with 3 months to spare. And we have as deep a bench now as we've seen in years. We were on track to make up the 3,000 airmen shortfall we experienced in 2023. However, due to the direct cuts of nearly $500 million in our military personnel account in the year-long continuing resolution, we were unable to fund the accession of these Americans who want to join our Air Force. We must find a better way. More Air Force means ruthlessly prioritizing in the right capabilities and projects while divesting from aging systems and unused infrastructure. In January 2025, we reported 23% in excess facilities and 60% in parking aprons and ramps. This inefficient laydown of force structure across our installations suggests there are opportunities for consolidation or divestment, but with your support, we will utilize existing authorities to reduce our footprint, identify cost reduction and revenue-generating opportunities, and right-size our infrastructure. We don't just need more Air Force, we need a more capable one. We need more tooth and less tail, a force that can deliver rapid, decisive blows and reposition quickly. That means investing more in platforms and people that enhance our warfighting capability. More means more options for our nation, enhanced homeland defense, strengthened deterrence, and unmatched power projection, strategically postured to deny adversaries. As the world saw on June 21st, no other service can match what the Air Force delivers. Effects anywhere on the globe, at any scale, on minimal notice. Our airmen are the best in the world, ready to win today and build the enduring force for tomorrow. With your support, we can ensure the Air Force remains the cornerstone of American air power, American power through the 21st century. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Chairman McConnell, Ranking Member Coons, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for your continued support and for the opportunity to testify on the Space Force's posture for FY26. Never before in our history has space been more critical to the future of our nation. Now more than ever, satellites underpin our economic prosperity, enabling everything from transportation and communication to agriculture and finance. Space has likewise become the backbone of national security, and today's joint force is built around the assumption that space power will be there when needed. GPS allows our forces to mass and maneuver fires with unprecedented accuracy. Satellite communications ensure command and control of operations around the world in real time. And today's cutting-edge satellites provide the warfighter with constant and detailed battlefield awareness, alerting America's forces of missile launches and threatening adversarial activity. All of these effects and more are provided by your Space Force at a cost of only 3% of the larger DoD budget and with less than 1% of its personnel. There's no question our nation's Space Force is a great value proposition for the department and an indispensable national asset for modern power projection. It is imperative that we match the dramatic rise in threats and increasing importance of space with resources to arm the Space Force effectively. The Space Force has been asked to accept new responsibilities and new missions. These new missions require new resources, or we will face tough choices between delayed readiness, reduced capacity, or unaddressed vulnerabilities. To illustrate my point, in the past 3 years, the Space Force has been asked to take on critical new missions like ground and air-moving target indications, adding new space control capabilities, advanced training requirements, and a threefold increase in launch tempo at our national spaceports. The most recent addition to our mission set is the space-based technology associated with Golden Dome program. These are not modernization efforts or shifts from legacy mission. They represent new requirements for missions that have never been accomplished by a military space organization. By FY26, we will have laid the foundational groundwork to continue these efforts in earnest. Our acquisition efforts are fully leveraging expanded authorities, enhanced contracting mechanisms, and new processes like the software acquisition pathway. If the resources are made available, the Space Force will be postured to use them effectively in pursuit of these critical priority missions at a time of increasing adversarial challenges in the space domain. To be successful in our expanding mission portfolio, we must be able to control the space domain, protecting our capabilities in space while denying an adversary the ability to use space against us. In pursuit of our critical missions, Space Force priorities have remained consistent. Build comprehensive domain awareness, deploy resilient mission architectures, and develop the capacity to hold an adversary's space assets at risk. To that end, we are developing cutting-edge sensors and networks to provide critical information to decision makers. We are bolstering our launch infrastructure and deployed proliferated constellations that are more resilient to attack. We are developing a host of innovative means to protect our satellites and network. And we are investing in robust counterspace systems to defeat space-enabled threats to our forces and to our homeland. Driving a cultural change to increase the speed and effectiveness of acquiring these new systems will be critical to our success. In fact, that is part of our Guardian DNA. Since improving acquisition was a driving force behind the creation of the Space Force from day one. Our acquisition professionals understand the unique needs of the warfighter, and these Guardians have driven efficiencies across all mission areas, saving hundreds of millions of dollars on launch services, leveraging novel contracting authorities to shave months off contracting timelines, and setting a new record for tactically responsive space just last year. All this while embracing a number of changes to our institutional culture to support improved acquisition, readiness, and sustainment, including standing up integrated units with sustainment and operations side by side, and establishing enhanced acquisition training at all levels to ensure a firm understanding of how acquisitions and operations combine to create combat-ready forces. We must institutionalize these early wins to ensure the complex ecosystem of acquisitions, budget, and requirements continues to rapidly produce the equipment our warfighters need to win in space. Today, with your support, our nation's guardians are poised to ensure we maintain our national advantage in space. So again, thank you to the committee for providing the support to make these successes possible. And I thank you for the opportunity to highlight the tremendous work that our guardians are doing to secure our nation's interests in, from, and to space. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, General. I'm a big fan of repetition. So I'll say again, I don't think we're budgeting enough for national defense. After delaying the inevitable for some time, the Air Force is now deep into modernizing 2 of the 3 legs of the nuclear triad. You're buying 6th-generation fighter aircraft. You're replacing an aging tanker fleet, which is must-pay bill if we want to keep projecting power globally. As I understand it, you're shelving a new early warning command and control aircraft, the E-7, in the hope that a space-based replacement will be ready in time, because you literally can't afford to do both on a shoestring budget. The Air Force also needs better, longer range munitions, and a lot more of them. After all, quantity has a quality of its own. The massive ordnance penetrator seems to have worked pretty well. I suspect you'd like a few more of them in inventory, but they aren't cheap and they aren't in the budget request. Space is important, and this subcommittee has supported efforts to build space domain awareness and control capabilities. But getting to space and operating there, certainly not cheap either. Reconciliation is said to make a down payment on Golden Dome investments, but the longer-term costs may run hundreds of billions of dollars. And don't get me started on operations and maintenance costs. Finally, we must not skimp on recruiting, training, and retaining capable airmen and guardians. So I do have a question after all of that. Can the Air Force and Space Force maintain American military superiority without substantial, sustained increases in annual defense spending?
Senator, Mr. Chairman, I think when I came into the position, although I've been around the Air Force a long time, one of the things that surprised me was the level of modernization going on in pretty much every mission area, as you were pointing out. I think to be able to maintain that as well as maintain readiness, I hesitate to use the term, but the one budget, two bill, the total request from the Department of the Air Force perspective, we will need comparable top line going forward to do everything that we're being asked to do right now.
Senator, I would clearly agree with Secretary of the Air Force that the new missions that are being asked of the Space Force to contest the domain of space, which has become a new warfighting domain, is going to require a new level of resources. And that means we are going to need more in order to accomplish the missions that we've been given.
Mr. Chairman, I also align with the Secretary's comments. I would say that the challenge for the Air Force is quite a bit different from the Space Force in that we are also having a small and an aging force that we're still using very heavily. So it's the challenge of maintaining the readiness there as well as going on to the modernization. So the Secretary's point about whatever happens this year, if we get increased top line, to sustain that top line, to ensure we have a reliable, predictable modernization path, I think will be important.
Well, we've had the Secretary, the Army, and the Navy up here recently, and I'm still confused about reconciliation. It was supposed to be an additive to make a one-time investment in capabilities or infrastructure for which we wouldn't otherwise be making annual appropriations. And yet I see B-21 bombers, the Sentinel ICBM, and nuclear-armed cruise missiles making their way into reconciliation. The administration even split the procurement and R&D funding for B-21s between the base and reconciliation. So can you explain in layman's terms to me, because my staff cannot, it looks like a shell game. Why are you not buying these capabilities in base? How much of what is in the reconciliation will have future annual appropriations costs in 27 and beyond? What happens if reconciliation doesn't pass?
So, Senator, Mr. Chairman, we see the totality of the request as what's necessary for us to execute the programs that are spread across the two portions of the request. But yes, it's critical to get access to the resources captured in both bills, or both requests.
Mr. Chairman, in what will sound admittedly like a cop-out, but it has the benefit of being true, I don't fully understand all of the mechanisms, but I think the first principle is, as we go for the resources that we believe we need, we certainly put those up through the process, and however those resources come to us, we certainly, as we said, I said in response to the last question, we certainly just look at however those mechanisms play out. The need for a sustained top line to be able to continue our modernization and maintain readiness is going to be key, however that happens throughout the mechanism between the department and Congress.
And I would just double down on what General Allvin said, and that's that the total request does represent an increase in the resources that are required for us to perform those missions. And we're still sorting through how the execution details will play out and affect the request.
Senator Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, if I might, to follow up on the question of the chairman, many of us on this committee are concerned that the approach of the administration is full-year continuing resolution, reconciliation, and rescission to achieve their spending goals, which frankly would turn this committee into a shiny hood ornament for Congress and deprive us of our central role in setting and working closely with the administration and spending priorities. So for the record, if you could, Secretary Meink, General Allvin, General Saltzman, do you oppose a full-year continuing resolution for the Air Force and Space Force? This is the first year DOD has been operating under a CR, and in my view, it has significant harms and consequences and puts you into a budgeting box that leads to this shell game the chairman was talking about. Secretary Meink?
Mr. Vice Chair, CR, whether a partial CR or a full use CR, has been one of the biggest challenges that I've faced throughout my career. Getting a and not just the full use CR, but historically the partial use CRs, all those are very challenging.
I have a bunch of other questions. If you could just get to a yes, it's bad, that'd be great. General?
The continuing resolutions do limit our ability to be able to predict well into the future, and predictability and reliability is key.
Agreed. General Saltzman?
The limitations of a CR, first, it's less money. Second, it hurts the timelines with which we can present the capabilities that we know we need to.
I think it makes it difficult for all of us to work together towards our shared objective about improving our national security. About F-35s, Secretary Meink, General Allvin, Senator Shaheen and I just returned from the NATO summit. A key part of future security in Europe is acquisition of F-35s at scale by many of our closest allies. And the fiscal year 26 request proposes buying 20 fewer than 25. To get to a simple, important point, mission availability rate for the Air Force's F-35 hovers between 40 and 60%. General Allvin, if I might just briefly, why is the availability so low, and what's the Air Force doing to improve that rate?
So understanding we have limited time, I don't want to be able to get on. There are several factors that go into that. First of all, there is the nature in which the contract was first developed that gives a lot of that over to the contractor to be able to supply the parts and have a lot more say in that. So there's a challenge in that. The sustainability issue is being taken on by the Joint Program Office, but it is partially due to supply parts availability, partially due to some of the scale of global pools that we have to deal with. But what we're doing to get after it, we're leaning heavily into the Joint Program Office to maybe take some more control of that sustainment money to ensure the aircraft available are higher than they are now. But I would say one last thing is the overall fleet may have a lower availability rate, and we do need to increase it overall. But overall fleet includes some of the training aircraft that we legitimately don't put at the full mission capability. But we
Understood.
have much more work to do, Senator.
Love to work with you on that. One of the great honors of representing the state of Delaware is that Dover Air Force Base is where those fallen in service to our nation first return. I'm haunted by the Tower 22 attacks and by the potential vulnerability of our airmen and guardians deployed around the world, particularly given the events of the recent weekend. Can you just assure us, Secretary, that the Air Force is doing everything it can to deliver cutting-edge, capable counter-UAS systems for our bases, both overseas and at home? Given Ukraine's striking success with Operation Spiderweb, many of us now have to question whether our air bases are vulnerable throughout the world.
It's a significant threat, Senator, and we are working both technologies to address that. But I also think we're going to need, particularly domestically, we're going to need help with Congress on getting a little bit more flexibility in how we address those threats. Otherwise, it's going to be very challenging. I think it's not just a technology solution. It is what are the rules of engagement, how we operate around our bases. It's just going to be critical.
I recognize we have FAA regulation restrictions, but this is an area where we should be working together closely to accelerate innovation and the deployment of next-generation technologies.
Agreed.
Last questions, if I could, to General Saltzman. Golden Dome, Space Force has the lead. Congressional Budget Office estimates it could cost as much as $500 billion. Can the space-based capabilities be delivered relatively quickly?
Well, relative speed is tough to ascertain at this point. I think we still have a lot of mission analysis to do. I'm proud of Mike Gutlein being selected to run that program. He's really a program manager of program managers. This will definitely need to be a system of systems approach, and that's what's going to extend the timelines, I think. But a demonstrated capability in the next 3 or 4 years is not unreasonable.
Well, we are eagerly interested in details, but the President's proposal and, frankly, the Department as a whole have been very slow, even obstinate in providing details. And we need more clarity about this path forward. Last thing for you, if I might. In the FY26 budget, we learned DOD is halting the Space Development Agency's Tranche 3 transport layer. And that work, which has been going on for several years and had robust competition and open standards, has been replaced by something called MILNET, which is being sole sourced to SpaceX. No competition, no open architecture, no leveraging a dynamic space ecosystem. This is a massive and important contract. Secretary Meink, doesn't handing this to SpaceX make us dependent on their proprietary technology and avoid the very positive benefits of competition and open architecture?
So I can let the General Saltzman talk to the details, but Tranche 2 is still funded in the budget submission, including the transport layer. So we're looking forward to delivery of that system over the next handful of years. As we go forward, MILNET, the term, should not be taken as just a system. How we field that going forward into the future is something that's still under consideration, and we will look at the acquisition of that.
Well, I'm out of time, but I would deeply appreciate a classified briefing, General Saltzman, on exactly where this is going and why this particular decision was made. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Moran, followed by Senator Murray and Senator Bozeman.
Chairman, thank you. Gentlemen, thank you for your presence and for your service. I want to visit first about the B-21. STRATCOM Commander General Cotton recently stated that the Air Force's plan to acquire 100 aircraft is insufficient and that 145 aircraft are necessary to meet global requirements. Either General Allvin or Secretary Meink explain the importance of this investment. What plans does the Air Force have to accelerate the production of this aircraft to increase the number in the fleet?
Well, thank you, Senator Ryan. This is the B-21 Raider certainly is cutting edge. It is absolutely necessary to maintain our dominance in the future. The program of record of a minimum of 100 is what General Cotton was referring to. having mass is also extremely important. And so as we look at the minimum of 100, we will continue to evaluate how many need to be at the time of production to make sure that they're meeting the need. And if there is an increased number, we'll certainly address that. With respect to acceleration, I think this is one of those where we certainly need to continue to look at it. We have bought down a lot of risk in the design. We have bought down a lot of risk in the development. We're currently buying down risk in the test. This is also an aircraft that is manufactured differently. And so we want to ensure that before we accelerate, we don't want to be overly zealous without fully understanding what it might mean to accelerate beyond a certain production rate. So that is something we are intensely looking at from not only an affordability point of view, but also a feasibility point of view to ensure that we don't go too fast. But it is very, very promising, and it's a significant capability for our Air Force. and the
Thank you. I
nation.
was there at this unveiling in Palmdale. It was quite an experience. General Allvin, the 177th Information Warfare Aggressor Squadron trains U.S. Air Force, joint and allied personnel in replicating current and emerging cyber threats as a red team, cyber red team, testing military networks. I'm concerned about the impact of cuts to the Office of the Director of Operations and Test Evaluation on the scope and services of red team missions. Are you aware of these cuts, and what's your thoughts on how it might affect active duty, guard, et cetera, both inside and outside the cyber domain?
So, Senator, we are certainly aware that those deliberations are ongoing for those cuts. We are going to evaluate what, if any, impact there are to the actual operational effectiveness of the red teams, because they do provide a critical capability to learn before combat where your vulnerabilities might be. So we will be addressing that and looking very closely if there are any impacts and how we might mitigate those going forward.
In today's threats of cyber, these red teams seem exceptionally valuable and important to the country.
And highly skilled. They're
Absolutely.
amazing airmen.
I'm supportive of the efforts to replace the E4B Survivable Airborne Operations Center. Wichita's NIAR is supporting, that's the National Institute of Aviation Research at Wichita State University, is supporting this capability by digitally twinning 747-8, allowing the Air Force to own the technical data package for the SAOC aircraft. Secretary Meink, could you highlight the importance of this program's continued full funding and the value to the Air Force owning the data rights to new and legacy programs?
Yeah, obviously, it's a critical part of our nuclear control architecture. As General Allvin spoke before, some of the challenges with the F-35 is the government does not own all the technical data associated with that aircraft. That is something we do not want to have happen again. So we are working our way through to acquire that technical data one way or another. In this case, as you're referring to, pulling the airplane apart and basically rebuilding the data package.
That has value, Mr. Secretary.
Yes. It's challenging, but it has a lot of value.
The Air Force recently discovered systemic issues with the B-1's aircraft backbone, detrimental to the bomber fleet. After failed attempts to fix the problem, NIAR once again developed a solution that will reset the life cycle of the aircraft. General Allvin, want to highlight the importance of this project, and which will maintain and extend the life of the B-1. And could you discuss the value of non-traditional suppliers in supporting sustainment of the Air Force's platforms?
Thank you, Senator. You just gave us Exhibit A. It's fantastic to be able to integrate that sort of capability and skill. And Wichita State University, also being very involved, their innovative nature has really drawn another source for us to be able to get the maximum readiness out of the platforms we have. It's highly important and very much appreciated.
I'm pleased to see you smile when I ask my questions about these topics. And finally, just a sentence, a comment. The 190th Air Refueling Wing, located in Topeka at Forbes Field, has a long and storied history in supporting the missions of refueling of the KC-135. It's proximate to the 22nd Air Refueling Wing and the 767 fuselage production line, both occurring in Kansas as well. Secretary Meink, as the Air Force evaluates the location for the KC-46 MOB, I would encourage you to strongly consider the 190th Refueling Wing in Topeka. It's a huge and significant issue for us.
Yes, Senator, we will.
Thank you. I was reluctant to bring this topic up because I look to see other states might have other members of this committee who have the same thoughts about their locations.
Senator Murray and then Senator Bozeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and yes, they do. Now, before I get to my questions, I do just want to say that I really appreciate the sacrifice of our service members and military families, and I know everyone on this dais feels the way, especially in the Air Force. As you know, Washington is home to the Fairchild Air Force Base, so we thank everyone. Mr. Secretary, as I'm sure you are aware, as a former KC-135 navigator yourself, our Air Force currently does not have the refueling capacity it needs to sustain operations in important strategic theaters. Fairchild Air Force Base in my home state of Washington is home to one of the Air Force's largest air refueling wings, and its proximity to the Arctic and the Indo-Pacific makes it a very key strategic launching point. Now, the existing KC-46A contract only has a few years remaining. When does the Air Force plan to award the next tanker production contract?
Senator, so I'll take for the record and exactly the date of when we or when we're
Approximate.
planning on awarding, but it is definitely a focus of ours. We agree we have to maintain and continue to build out the tanker fleet to maintain that capability. As just demonstrated over the weekend, it's a critical part of our architecture.
And you can't even give me an approximate within a year, within a month, within days, within?
I would have to yield to the acquisition folks to figure out when that decision is going to be made. We understand that we're on the cusp of the end of the contract, existing contract 183 for the current KC-46. That evaluation is undergoing. I would say within months we'll be able to understand when that date would be, the exact date.
Okay, all right. And what remains to be done to address the remaining Category 1 deficiencies in the KC-46A contract?
Yes, Senator, they're working very hard. They're drawing those down to a few. Obviously, we still have a couple with the remote visualization system. The 2.0 version of that should be completed. That's really the long pole in the tent for all of them. That should be done by the fourth quarter of 27. We also have a crimped sort of drain valve issue that's being worked. We also have one where they call it the stuck boom, where it can only refuel. There's one aircraft that can't refuel, and that's the A-10. But largely, those are. They keep it from being full capability, but they're just refueling just about everything, including several of the capabilities that happened last weekend. So it's
Right.
still a capable aircraft. We just need to keep working.
Okay, and if you could just stay in touch with my office as you get closer on those details. Let me switch topics, because over the past few years, policies to help recruit staff for child development centers on military bases have led to lower wait times, especially in the Air Force. In fact, in 2024, the Air Force wait list dropped below 3,000 children, done by we worked really hard to get it there, and that was the lowest since the Air Force began tracking it back in 2018. But after Trump's hiring freeze on civilian employees at DoD, several Air Force bases have been forced to reduce their child care services, and the child care wait list has now ballooned to over 4,000 kids. That is really unacceptable to me. That would leave our military families and parents who are putting their lives on the line for our country really scrambling to find child care, and in many places, CDCs are the only real option for child care. So, Mr. Secretary, what is the Air Force doing to make up for the CDC staff shortages?
We are very aware of the issue, Senator, and it is a priority for us to fix, and we are looking at that. Talked about it just yesterday with the team. I think there is a plan to start addressing the shortfall in staffing. I don't know, General Allvin, you have any more details on that?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Senator, what I would add to that is your point is exactly right. When we work very hard and we got the critical caregivers
Yep.
at the level, during this initial deferred resignation program, we kept all the providers. They were not authorized to go, but some of the back staff, the support staff, was authorized to go. And so because of that, we had to close a couple classrooms here and there and reduce that. I believe that is going to be faster to rehire than it would be to get the care provider. So I think that's where.
If you can stay in touch with my office on how you're progressing on that, what you're doing, I would appreciate
Senator, we'll
it.
do that.
And finally, I want to ask, because over the past few months, we've seen the Trump administration start to systematically dismantle DOD's ability to welcome all who wish to serve, and I am particularly concerned about attacks on women service members, from healthcare to firing senior leadership. And in April, the Air Force suddenly reversed its policy allowing women aircrew members to fly during early stages of pregnancy. That policy, aligned with FAA pregnancy guidelines, was widely applauded when it was made in 2022, and then the Trump administration eliminated it without any explanation. That reversal really forces women to choose between advancing their careers and starting their families, and it drastically reduces women's opportunities to develop expertise in really highly technical roles for our Air Force. I want to ask, what data supported the Trump administration decision to prohibit women from flying in non-combat environments during early stages?
Well, thank you, Senator. And that was an Air Force policy change. So that would be on us in the Air Force. And the difference is that even though you talk about the alignment with FAA, the change was to high-G, high-performance aircraft. That was the change in 2022 to enable them to pursue waivers to fly for those high-G and high-performance aircraft. And the idea was to increase readiness, because increasing readiness, having more opportunities for everyone to fly in those high-performance aircraft. What we did, we looked at the data from 2019 to 2022 and saw how many waivers were being pursued, how many waivers were being granted between that time, and then between 2022 and 2025, so 2 3-year periods, and saw no real difference in the amount of time being requested or given for those in high-performance aircraft. So because of that, there was no real increase in waivers from those 2 periods, and the risk was still there. It was an unknown risk that we just reverted to really closer to what the other services have been.
Well, that's not the same as the FAA guidelines. And
Right.
Were there any specific cases or incidences that raised this medical concerns?
It was just the lack of increased readiness without the ability to fully understand the risk. And that
Well-
was not FAA. That was for the high-G, high-performing aircraft, for which the FAA does not really have those guidelines specific to.
Well, I just have to say that what's a woman supposed to do? Do a pregnancy test before she takes a flight? I mean,
No, Senator, and we can give you the full paper. This is not just totally restrictive. It's more aligned with the other services as well.
Well,
So-
I have looked at the policy, and I am concerned. I haven't seen the data. You have some, give it to me. If there's specific examples, give it to me. But I do not think that we should discriminate against women service members, and I would really ask you to consider reversing this.
Senator, we'll provide you all the data behind it.
Thank you.
Bozeman, Murphy, Capito, and Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Coons. And first of all, thank you all for your service, a very distinguished service to your country. Mr. Secretary, we've discussed the critical role the F-35's training mission at Ebbing plays, not only in maintaining our air superiority, but in strengthening our alliances. I was thrilled to see the first 2 Polish pilots recently graduate from the program, a milestone that reflects the growing importance of training our allies on U.S. platforms. Senator Coons earlier mentioned Senator Shaheen being at NATO, and again, the excitement of our allies having this type of plane. Can you talk a little bit about why it's important to train our partners and allies on U.S. systems, and how that training helps improve readiness and strengthen deterrence globally?
Yes, Senator, and I think during the chairman's introduction, talking about our how important our partners are, particularly when they're planning to ramp up expenditure on military defense. I think a couple of things. Just the training with my guess is when you were training, you trained with international partners as well. I did as a navigator when I was going through training. That's stuff that helps forever, right? So I think it's a combination of, I would argue, simplifying FMS so that allows them to get the platforms and then allowing them to train with us on the platforms is one of the best way to get integrated effects between us and our international partners.
Very good. Did you have something?
I would just add that we, on the Air Force side, we're very cognizant of if those delays occur, that we continue to have dialogue with the nations to ensure that we sort of feather in the training to where there's not a gap or there's not sort of a glut of training all at one time, so we can smooth flow that. Because again, if we're selling them the best equipment, you want them to be trained by the best, so we want to be able to do that at Ebbing.
That's right. And really, the only problem is they want them yesterday, you know. General Allvin, can you speak to how the deployable combat wing construct fits into the Air Force's broader force design and readiness goals? Earlier this year, the Air Force announced that Little Rock Air Base and 4 other installations were selected as the first tranche of the deployable combat wing initiative. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that means?
Absolutely, Senator. It was brought up a couple times here about the increased threat that our airmen are under when they're deployed overseas. And the deployable combat wing allows us the opportunity to move away from a pattern we've had over the past few decades in which we sort of crowdsource airmen from across our Air Force, put them together, and then put them over in the theater, and they go and they fight together. That was okay for the last 20 years, but as we see, the threats are more increasing and complex, even in the Middle East. You take that times 10, and that's what you have in the Indo-Pacific theater. I can't in good conscience continue to send airmen over that are trained as individuals and not trained as units, to fight as units and understand the new complexities of the strategic environment. And so the deployable combat wing allows us to do just that. And we have an increase in airmen that will make sure that when that entire wing picks up and goes, that the base is still supported. But I think we're going to see not only an impact on fighting effectiveness, but we're also going to see an increase in morale, because units that train together, that do things together, have a common esprit de corps that I think is pushing that warrior ethos we're trying to enhance.
Very good. I'm not going to have you all comment about it because several have already asked you to comment about it, the continuing resolution, the importance of that, of us doing our work and you all helping us in doing that work so that we can get you a reliable source of income so that you can plan. And I mean, how does anybody function without that? And you have, sadly, as you mentioned, Mr. Secretary, you know, that's been kind of the mark of most of your careers, is having to work around the situation that we get you in. Also, and again, you've already gone into detail about it. Senator Coons mentioned the due to the incident that occurred in Ukraine with the Ukrainians without an Air Force wiping out the Russian Air Force. Things that we need to do that. So we want to work with you, and if you all will give us some ideas, some specific things, I think this committee would be very, very interested in actually getting some legislation that would result in us actually doing something.
Happy to do that, Senator. And as I mentioned before, we're working on some suggestions to bring forward to you. Hopefully we can get that to you fairly soon.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, guys.
Senator Murphy, Senator Capito, Senator Sheen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here today and for your service. I wanted to spend my time trying to dig into the details of our Air Force One program. If the facts are as I understand it, this looks like one of the bigger wastes of money inside your budget, but it also presents some real ethical and moral problems, I think, for this committee. So, Mr. Secretary, if I can just sort of understand what's happening here, because obviously the facts have been changing pretty quickly over the last 5 months. We obviously have this very big $4 billion contract with Boeing, and they are building 2 planes to replace the current Air Force One. You testified in the House earlier that you believe those planes are on track to be ready by 2028. Is that still your estimate?
Senator, we are looking at whether or not we can accelerate the delivery to 28. That was not where it originally was. We are looking to move that forward.
And what's your understanding of the transfer of the Qatari jet? When Secretary Hegseth was before this committee, he said that the MOU had not been signed, but there's also been public reporting that we're in possession of the airplane.
Senator, I can't speak to the details of where the MOU is and its process. I would say is the Department of Air Force's position to take possession of that airplane and execute the required modifications to allow it to act as an interim aircraft until we get the B-25s or the 25Bs. We're happy to discuss actually the details of that, but we'll have to do it at a higher classification.
And I understand the details of these agreements are classified, but whether or not they exist, I do not think need to be classified. So do you have a contract yet for the retrofit of the Qatari plane?
We have, I'm not sure if we actually have finally signed the contract, but we have discussed it with the contractor. We are in a position to execute that once we take possession of the aircraft. I don't know if, General, if you know the actual state of the contract. We're positioned to start executing as soon as you take possession of the aircraft, though.
You've testified that may be in the neighborhood of $400 million. That sounds just quite honestly wildly rosy to me. From what I understand from folks who do this kind of work, that could ultimately be a contract closer to $1 billion. But confirm what the number you think is, and when do you think the retrofit would be done?
So this is my comment earlier, is that the specifics of those numbers, what those numbers mean, relate to the actual specific modifications and what we're doing with the aircraft, and that needs to be done at a higher classification.
And what's the date you think that retrofit would be done?
Expect it'll take us just short of a year.
Just short of a year. So you don't have the contract yet. The work's going to take a year. That sounds like this plane is going to be ready sometime at the end of 2026, and then you've got the Boeing planes ready a year later. So we're going to spend somewhere between $400 million and $1 billion to get a bridge plane that only lasts 1 year or 1.5 years.
So, Senator, we are positioned to deliver the aircraft a year after we take possession. Again, the 25B date is 28. Probably at the earliest, so it would be more than a year, Senator.
And your understanding is that this plane, when the Boeings are ready, will go to President Trump's personal possession?
I couldn't speak to that, Senator.
Can you commit that they will not ultimately end up in President Trump's personal possession?
So, Senator, I couldn't speak to that, and I'm fairly certain that's not in my authority.
Well, but isn't that relevant to the committee? Isn't it relevant as to whether we want to spend $400 million to $1 billion? If the plane only is in the U.S. possession for a year and then it becomes President Trump's personal possession, that doesn't sound like a great use of my taxpayer dollars. Isn't that a really important, relevant question? Wouldn't that matter to you?
Well, Senator, I can just speak what I've been asked to do and what we signed up to do, which is the current 25 is challenged from a readiness perspective, very challenged. It's a very old aircraft. The 25Bs are going to show up later than we'd initially hoped for, and I've been asked to modify this aircraft as soon as we get possession of it, and we are positioned to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Capito, and then Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank the three of you and all those who serve with you and for all of us. I appreciate it. I wanted to say my colleagues have been talking about the Air Force bases in their relative states. So I'm going to say there's not one in West Virginia. But we do have some great units, airlift wings, the 130th and the 167th that have been called on numerous times throughout the years of my service. And I'm very grateful to them and grateful for the role that they play. So before I start the main question, I wanted to ask you, General Allvin, in your opening statement, you mentioned something when you mentioned the number 3,000 people who want to be in the service but cannot because of the continuing resolution. How does that, there's not enough fund to onboard them? Is that, so what do you do here?
Well, we had the resources and we had the successful, thanks to the recruiters really working hard, we had the opportunity to be able to assess 3,000 more, and we were on course to do that. But when we got the continuing resolution in the middle of the year, and part of that was also unusual for a continuing resolution in that this continuing resolution also had a mark. That mark was specifically against the MilPERS account. So to be able to onboard additional, we would have had to have MilPERS to be able to pay them so we wouldn't go anti-deficient. So because we didn't have the resources, because that was pulled, we then back lowered our goal to meeting what we had at the beginning of the year. So we had the opportunity to get those 3,000 back, and we had planned to until the continuing resolution yanked the money.
Well, in my view, you've been asked, everybody on the panel has been asked, what's the effect of a CR and what's the detriment to a CR? In my view, what you just told me, not being, after sitting here year after year hearing how we're not meeting recruiting targets, we can't get enough people who are interested, we're trying to refashion the way we're recruiting. You're saying we have people on the cusp and because of this continuing resolution, unable to move forward. To me, that's probably one of the best examples ever of why a continuing resolution.
Yes, and I don't know if that just specific to this continuing resolution, because this is the first time
Right.
I'm not a pro that I'd actually seen marks in a continuing resolution.
Right. Well, let me ask you about operation that we just did last week. I would like to ask you, General, really, I think General Kane just gave a press conference earlier right before we came and really methodically worked through the preparation and the talent that was needed to do that. I want to give you a chance to sort of give your version, shortened version of where you see that and what kind of training was necessary to.
So first, let me say thank you for the opportunity, and I want to respect the fact that I could go 40 minutes. I
Right.
will try and be very brief. I think Chairman Kane did a fantastic job about talking about what it took to ensure that the weapons were loaded correctly, to ensure that the aircraft were launched and they met their parameters, to ensure that the actual weapons hit the target and then the weapons operated as they were intended to do. The other part is, I would imagine, how many people involved in all of this, from the people who imagined the bomb, who designed it, who developed it, who tested it. There's a lot of success to go around here, to all that entire tanker bridge that brought them there and back. I think every one of those people, one of those airmen that was a part of that mission, they may not have fully understand the geostrategic impact it had, but they knew that was their job to do, and they knew that the mission depended on them, but they weren't the only one doing the mission. So I know those B-2 pilots were pretty glad they got the gas when they needed the gas, et cetera,
Right.
et cetera. So this was a fantastic success, but I want to steal what Mr. Chairman said as his opening. Military primacy does not happen overnight.
Right.
This is one of those that we're so proud of all of the work we put in ahead of time. And this manifestation is another demonstration that the Air Force makes the ridiculously complex look routine, but that doesn't come without effort. So thank you for letting me expound on that.
Well, thank you for that. And just to move quickly to the GBU 57 that was used, the bunker buster, do we have in the budget a replacement for these? I mean, how many were actually used? I don't know if that's all classified
The
piece
use
of
isn't,
information.
how many, we did use 14 on this. The inventory, we are still adding to the inventory. I would sort of leave that maybe for another discussion. However, this is not a static environment. So now that we know that it was successful, I'm pretty sure that people who are potential adversaries might look at that and they may adapt. So we are constantly looking at
Right.
whether it be those or an advanced technology or advanced tactics to be able to get ahead and make sure as the threat moves to defend, we have the ability to put the kit together that can continue to have events like last Saturday night happen if we're called upon again. It's constantly moving forward. So it might be something different than the GBU 57, some advancement based on what the enemy might do.
Well, thank you, and congratulations again. Thank you.
Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. Let me start by adding my congratulations to Senator Capitos and others for the excellent work of the pilots who conducted the operation over the weekend. I think we were all very impressed also with General Kane's explanation of what happened. I would like to follow up, though, on Senator Murphy's questions about the Qatari gift to use as Air Force One, because it's been reported that the plane is not only going to have to be limited to domestic travel because of the security concerns about retrofitting, but also that it's going to require a fighter escort because it's not going to lack the security capabilities that the Air Force One program has built into it. And you spoke to the additional costs to retrofit. So can you talk about what we are not going to do because we are going to be incurring those costs for retrofitting? What account is that going to come out of? And what are we not going to be able to do because of those additional costs?
Senator, I guess, with the movement of money around, I'm not sure that I could say exactly what we're not going to be able to do. We reface some activities based on fact of life to free up resources to do that. I would say that we'd be happy to discuss in more detail on what the modifications are and what are the operational environments and how we would operate the aircraft in a different environment. But what I'd also say is that even today, and regardless of the airplane, we have to operate it differently based on the threat environment that even the current or any of the future aircraft will go into. Again, can't talk to you in detail about that, but that is always a consideration.
So you can't, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you can't tell us where you think the funding's going to come from? What account? Where are we going to, if it's going to cost $400 million to $1 billion, where are we going to take that money from?
Senator, in the reallocation of resources, there were dollars that were moved from the Sentinel program that were excess to need in '24, and that's what was used to fund the program. And we will ensure that those resources are there. Very clear, the Sentinel program is fully funded, all the resources it needs to execute as quickly as possible. Just with the number curity and some of the restructuring and termination liability, go into the details, but that money was early to need, and that was what was used to fund this effort.
So is it going to further delay the Sentinel program?
Absolutely not, Senator. Absolutely not.
Well, I'm going to look, when we get further budget detail, which we're still waiting on, I'm going to look with great deal of interest on exactly where the funding is going to come from, because I think there are a lot, I share Senator Murphy's concerns that there are a lot of unanswered questions, both in terms of budgetary capability of this aircraft and also ethical concerns about its acceptance, which is not an issue for you, I appreciate. Senator Murray talked about the KC-46s, and we're very proud that the 157th Refueling Wing in New Hampshire is the first Guard base to get the KC-46, but have been continually concerned about the delays in getting the remote vision system up and operating, and I understand it's slipped again. You mentioned, I think, General Allvin, that it's going to now be in late 2027. And my understanding, we've been following this for over 10 years now, that it was supposed to have been delivered in 2025. So why is it slipped again? And what do we need to do to ensure that it actually gets delivered on that date?
Well, the reason, and I had several conversations with Mr. Steve Parker, for the CEO, to ensure that I understand the challenges. And the challenges are largely because of sort of software stability and some of the other pieces having to do with the actual system itself. So it is a new system that this next iteration of it is that much better, and it's a much better technology, but they're having sort of new program issues with it. I meet him quarterly, and I discuss that with Mr. Parker, and so we're staying on that, and he is 100% committed to it. And so the fourth quarter of 27 would actually be this summer fall. So it is very much on his mind. The summer fall of 27 is with fiscal year 27, so it's a little bit earlier than the end of calendar year 27 is what I'm being told, sometime between July and September of 27. So,
but it's still next year.
It is. So we continue to work with him on that. And again, I don't want to make it sound like everything's fine, but we are fully operating that aircraft.
Oh, and I'm very aware
and yes,
that
ma'am,
it's
you know
operational. And I think it's doing a great job, and I know that air refueling was a critical piece of the mission over the weekend. But again, I think it speaks to the budgetary challenges that the chairman mentioned at the outset, when what was supposed to have been delivered winds up not getting delivered for another 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As others have referenced, I want to thank all three of you for the incredible work in the Middle East, not only in terms of defending our ally, Israel, but obviously the strikes on Iran's nuclear capability. It is impossible to overstate the importance of what you did and the incredible skill with which you did it. And we can never take that for granted. It was absolutely unbelievable. And thank you to all of you and all of the men and women in uniform who executed it and continue to execute those missions across all services. It's absolutely remarkable. Secretary Meink, I want to thank you for a recent meeting we had. We covered a whole range of subjects, including talking about Golden Dome, which is an incredible undertaking. We actually have a de facto Golden Dome right now. It's called the nuclear triad. And it's been successful since World War II. Nobody has tried to strike us because they know that we have a nuclear arsenal that nobody can compare with. And we need to maintain that advantage. That's the whole idea with Sentinel and the other upgrades that we're making. You and I talked about that. We talked about staying on track with the funding and also with a concurrent approach. Now, I spoke at length with Deputy Secretary Feinberg yesterday. It sounds after that conversation like there are more changes coming to the program. Can you speak to that, and do we need to get together again and maybe even the SCIF to talk about additional changes coming? But it sounded like there were changes in the approach even beyond what you and I talked about when I visited with him yesterday.
So I'd be happy to, and yeah, there are probably some things that we should talk about in a different environment. And what I would say, though, is that part of the nomenclature that came out of there, some of the recommendations that came out of there were associated with requirements, stability requirements, understanding of those requirements between the operational and the acquisition groups. A lot of that, I think, it wasn't a meeting, don't know for sure, but my guess would be a lot of that is what the Secretary was alluding to. We are still assessing the requirements to both ensure that we can keep the budgets under control, but also to simplify and accelerate the schedule. That is with the Minuteman III. We want to make sure that we can deliver in line with the Minuteman III program. And any more details on that, Senator, be happy to talk about in another room.
But it's your assessment that his approach is in sync with what you and I talked about recently?
Yes, Senator. I've spent quite a bit of time with SecDef on this, and I think the teams are working really well together. We have a pretty good approach, both organizationally and how we're going to handle the requirements. And I think that also could be, as alluding to, is there some organizational focus we're trying to bring to that program and a number of other programs to ensure successful execution.
Good. And then Senator Bozeman referenced something you and I talked about too, is any proposals that any of you have on drone or counter-drone to help protect our bases, both in CONUS and overseas, we want those ideas and would want to act on them aggressively, any assistance we can provide. General Saltzman, in the 2026 budget, funding for the transport layer as part of SDA's Tranche 2 launches fully divests SDA of transport layer in Tranche 3. Okay? So you reduce them in Tranche 2 and you eliminate them in Tranche 3. So how are you going to replace that SDA capability without that funding and that continued mission?
Well, we're on track for the Tranche 1 delivery, 126 vehicles for space data transport. As you mentioned, there's still some money in Tranche 2 to continue to flesh out that space data transport network. And now we have to look at what are the other avenues to deliver potentially a commercial proliferated low Earth orbit constellation. And so we are simply looking at alternatives as we look to the future as to what's the best way to scale this up to the larger requirements for data transport.
And I've talked to both the Secretary and you about not being entirely dependent on contractors. We depend on Air Force, Space Force, Department of Defense, and the other services. And we can't be dependent on private enterprise when it comes to fighting a war, right? Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. We can't be dependent on it.
Right. General Allvin, B-52, are we on track with the upgrades on the B-52? And then the other thing I thought was interesting, Senator Moran talked about the B-21 program, which is something I've worked very hard to get funding for, and more of them, which I'm a big fan of that idea. But reference both, updates on the B-52 and how you see the bomber fleet going forward in terms of having enough bombers.
Thank you, Senator. And they are interlinked. Obviously, the B-52 will still be a big part of our inventory for years to come. And so there's two parts to that, with the re-engineering program and then with the radar modernization. With the engineering program, we had an issue with some inlet distortion. We believe we've got some initial test data back that we think the fix. It's on the initial data shows. We think we might have sorted that out. That's on the engine piece. On the radar modernization piece, we had some cost increases due to the cost of the object that we thought in 2021 is a little bit different than it is now. But both of those programs are moving forward. They both need to be synced together. So as we do that, it's going to be a challenge to ensure that when we do the integration and that modification, we have enough overall of our bomber fleet to ensure we can get to the B-21 in full production. So that will be something we'll manage in the years to come.
Mr. Chair, if I could beg your indulgence for a quick follow-up. So given the B-52 is almost more like a truck versus the B-21, is there a difference in capability where you need both based on our global reach and missions? Or
Absolutely. This is not only about, obviously the B-21 will be able to access places the B-52 can't even get close. The B-52 will also be able to move forward and provide mass for long-range munitions from a long-range bomber. So put them together and you continue to have that air dominance that the nation needs.
Thank you.
Durbin and then Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to join the dual chorus of thanking all of you in uniform and those who participated in the operations last weekend, and to your families for supporting your decision to serve our country in such an extraordinary way. And secondly, I happen to have an Air Force base in Illinois, Scott Air Force Base, which serves as DoD's global mobility and transporting hub. Very proud of it. There's a 126th Air Guard unit at that base, also interested in KC-46, so let me make a point for the record. We hope you'll give favorable consideration to their application. Mr. Secretary, Elon Musk is a major federal contractor. His company, SpaceX, does a lot of business with the federal government, and there are other companies that he's involved with that are federal contractors. Is that correct?
SpaceX is a major defense contractor.
And they've done some extraordinary things, quality products, there's no question about it. And I've actually, years ago, met with Mr. Musk when he claimed that he could do what we were asking others to do for a fraction of the cost. I don't know how successful he's been in proving that. So it was curious to me when I read that Mr. Musk sat in on your interview with President Trump when you were being considered for the role of Secretary of the Air Force. How did that work?
There were a number of people who sat in an interview, but it was quite clear to me that the president was executing the interview. He asked all the questions, a great discussion. Then I had a follow-on conversation with just the president, and I'm very proud that he selected me based on my history and our discussion to lead the Department of the Air Force.
Can I stick with that question for a moment? When it came to the questions, you're saying Mr. Musk did not ask questions?
No, Senator, the president asked questions.
Only the president?
President, yeah.
I see, okay. Did you consider that to be unusual, that a major federal contractor would be in the room on your interview with the president for this position?
Senator, I've never been through a nomination process before. I was pretty excited to be in the room with the president. We had a great discussion, so I couldn't speak to anything beyond that.
Thank you.
It was a very technical discussion. And again, I'm just super proud that he honored me with this job.
Thank you. Wish you the best in the job. General Saltzman, if a constituent of mine asks, why would we spend $25 or even $500 billion on Golden Dome, what would be your answer?
The system of systems includes sensors that detect missile warning, which is vital to Homeland Defense. The data transport layer that will underpin Golden Dome is going to be vital for a number of mission functions around the world. And it's that final piece where we try to protect the homeland with interceptors that I think is vital.
And question I might have is whether or not we are trying to defend our satellites in orbit as well?
We are working as hard as we can to make sure that the satellites that we have on orbit that we depend on are as resilient to attack as possible, and then also being able to use counter space capabilities to impose costs on anybody that would try to attack our satellites.
Can you give me a rough estimate of how many satellites we're talking about in your recent description?
That we have to protect, or
Yes.
dozens, and growing every year with the Space Development Agency's proliferated constellation. In the next 2 years, we'll put another 300 on orbit. And so there's a growing number of satellites that we have to protect.
And could you identify some basic missions that those satellites are performing on a regular basis?
Nuclear command and control through satellite communications, missile warning. The GPS constellation not only provides precision navigation and timing, but it also, that timing signal is key to economic and financial infrastructure as well as the internet that you use.
That's a big deal.
It's a big deal.
So what about our adversaries? China, Russia?
My biggest concern is that the kill web that we call it, that the PRC has put in place, allows them to track and target at great range the rest of the joint force in all the other domains. They've put a very capable ISR web together on orbit, and if we're going to protect the joint force, we have to be able to mitigate the effects that they're generating by that constellation.
Is that what the Golden Dome is all about?
Well, Golden Dome is more about homeland defense. I have to protect the joint force from space-enabled attack worldwide.
What do we characterize that defense by name?
Space superiority.
That's pretty obvious. That's good. I like that. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator McCoskey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for being here today. Thank you for your leadership and just deep appreciation for the extraordinary professionalism that we see out of our Air Force, all of our military, as we saw things executed literally before our eyes over the weekend. So just thank you for that. I want to ask a little bit this morning about the E7 and the termination, the 26 budget request seeking to terminate this acquisition program that's slated to replace the E3 sentries. You've heard me before talk about the need, certainly up in the north. We just haven't heard, in my view, sufficient justification for the cancellation of such a critical program. We hear all the time how the E3 fleet is barely operational, it's kind of limping along. I do understand, I've had the conversation about the intent to shift towards space-based AMTI, supposedly by 2027, and then using the Navy's E2 as a stopgap. I'm told that the E2 can't match the E7's capabilities. And then when it comes to the AMTI, we heard from General Gutlein. He estimated the capabilities might only, his words were, start coming online in the early 2030s. General Allvin, you have underscored previously to me the E7's superior role over the E3. And then General Saltzman, in prior comments, you've agreed that space offers advantages but isn't optimized for the full military spectrum and have advocated for basically a mixed capabilities approach. So, General Allvin, can you detail for us any concerns that you may have on the gaps terminating the E7 program presents?
Well, Senator, I think you appropriately characterized the challenges that we're having with the E3, and I will acknowledge that the E7 is a far superior aircraft in its capabilities to the E3. I think as we look at multiple phenomenologies, as we discussed multiple domains, that fell into the realm of difficult decisions that were made by the Department of Defense, and we'll have to look forward in the future on how we would stitch together those and ensure that we would mitigate any gap based on the
Do you
resource
worry,
decisions.
though, about the fact, I mean, stitching together to fill the gaps, if it works, but we don't want to be operating off of a wing and a prayer here. Are you comfortable with the fact that we'll be able to stitch these gaps?
Well, Senator, we'll certainly work as hard as we can on that. We will look to that and look at the ability and how fast the phenomenologies from the other domains will come on, and we will deal with these hard decisions that were had to be made by the Department of Defense.
General Saltzman, can you speak to that just in terms of when you might expect the delivery of the space-based AMTI?
Well, we're already evaluating data to include our own kind of government-based evaluations of the data, as well as what some of the vendors are telling us the data looks like. It's promising. And then you have to put together the right contract vehicle to launch the satellites in a time and place. So I think by the end of the decade, you will start to see capability delivering data. I won't say that that's accomplishing the mission by 29. I think General Gutline's assessment that this is an early 30s delivery of a real capability is not too far off.
Yeah. Just recognizing the very tenuous situation that we are in right now and the need truly for speed on all of this, we get that, but we've got to be honest. If we're going to be facing some gaps that are going to allow for a level of exposure, we're talking about spending a lot of money on a lot of different initiatives that are quite significant, but we've got to have the ability to go from A to B before we go from A to Z here. I want to ask you a question, Mr. Secretary, and this relates to the microreactor pilot. Finally, after way too many years here, we've got another notice of intent to award for the Allvin microreactor project. It's good news. It's long overdue. We all get that. I know that the initial goal was to have this demonstration reactor operational by 2027. Every time I've asked, I get well, we're on schedule. Well, you can't be on schedule if you haven't even had a notice of award yet. So can you give me what you believe is a more realistic deployment schedule? And hopefully that the department has a strategy for scaling the microreactor deployment beyond Allvin. I think this is going to be absolutely key for us to meet our energy needs, whether it's in Allvin or ADAC or wherever in the world you may be.
I agree, Senator. This is going to be a critical capability in many locations that we have to operate in, that local power just is not available or not reliable or expensive, or we impart challenges on the local communities when we do come in. So I agree 100% with you. I'm a little bit at a loss because I was under the impression that we had actually had announced that we made a selection and that we had awarded a contract. I will get back to you on the specific details of that contract, but we are still looking at 27. The contractor is just spinning up. We're still getting some of the specific details, but we are still looking at a 27. But I will get back to you, Senator, if there's anything.
Can you get back to me with more accuracy to that? Because we're told that it has issued, the Air Force has issued another notice of intent to award for the project, and again, that it's still 2027.
Yeah, I'll get you the specifics of where the contract state is, but I believe it's still 2027.
Okay, I'm thinking this is still wishing a prayer, but I want you to stick with that 2027 date.
I'm probably not going to bet a week's salary on that, Senator. But we have the contractor. We have a lot of confidence in the approach, and we are. The important thing is we're off to the races now, and we're moving out.
I look forward to a follow-on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all, the Air Force and Space Force. Looking forward for you writing history. You'll make history. To our airmen out there, men and women, you really shine brightly, so please pass that on. The best Air Force in the world and the best Space Force in the world, too. I don't even know if anybody else has one, but we'll still be the best. So let's talk about money. Do we need a supplemental, given the level of intensity of engagement in the last year or two, providing weapons to Israel, dropping bombs ourselves? Would a supplemental help, Mr. Secretary?
So I believe at this point, with the total requests between the reconciliation and the base, we'll meet our demands. But if I see different, I'll be the first one to advocate for additional resources.
Okay. What about you, General? What do you think?
Well, Senators, you know, I'm in the different position of saying
Yeah.
if there's money to be
No,
had,
I
I'll
mean,
take
but
it all we
you're-
can. But I'm fully.
No, I know you work for the secretary, and that's what it should be. I mean, in terms of the inventory out there, how do we stand?
We have been expending resources both on our own defense of our own platforms and to support our allies and partners. And so we do constantly, it is a challenge. It's a challenge we take on readily.
What I want to
be-
do is just not, entice China or anybody else to say now's the time to jump. So let's look at that. I think definitely we need to do one for Israel, Mr. Chairman, a supplemental. And I'd like to, Ms. Secretary, if we ever get to that point, you can give us some input about what you need. You'd be glad to do that, I'm sure.
Yes, Senator, I will, and.
Well, let's say for some reason we didn't pass the reconciliation bill, that would be a real blow to your plans, right?
That would be a massive blow to our plans.
So to anybody watching out there, this $150 billion in the reconciliation bill doesn't get talked about a lot, but it's the difference between making it or not making it in the short term here. You need the money and you need it yesterday. A little bit about the strike itself. General Kane did a marvelous job talking about the air crews and the Patriot missile battery crews and making it real to us what your people do every day. And it was a well-told story and a wonderful story to celebrate. And I'm willing to say without any hesitation that the Midnight Hammer operation severely damaged, completely decimated in many ways these 3 sites. That's not even an issue for me. I think they were completely decimated in terms of being used anytime soon, and that means years. I think we set them back years in terms of using those sites. But I want to make the point, has the regime changed its goals at all? Ms. Secretary, have you seen any intel to suggest that the Ayatollah's regime has abandoned their desire to destroy Israel after this strike?
Senator, I couldn't speak to that, particularly in
But
this
what about you,
environment.
General? Anybody?
I have not seen any intel.
Anything in space out there to suggest otherwise?
If there is, I haven't seen that intel.
Yeah. Okay, well, I hope we don't ever meet the Iranians in space. That'd be a bad day. So the point I'm trying to make is we should celebrate this military operation. I think it was hugely important. But my goal is to change the future, and the future is only going to change when the regime changes. And I'm not talking about invading Iran, but change their behavior or the people. And that's up to the Iranian people. But right now, it's the policy of the Ayatollah and his regime to destroy the state of Israel and to come after us. And I'm hoping that will change. But if that doesn't change, we're going to be right back at it. General Allvin, can you tell me from an air power point of view, what are the limitations of air power in terms of controlling the desires of the regime? Do we know if there are other sites out there? It seems to me that they may be. I don't know. I'm not convinced they didn't plan for this and move some stuff around, but we don't know. I just know this really worked. But can you sort of give us some indication of the limits of air power?
Well, I'd say one of the limits of air power is we can't hit what we don't know is there. So the ability, it's part of an entire apparatus of understanding. And then once we know what's there, our job as United States Air Force is to offer options to the president to be able to, as we say, put a warhead on a forehead anywhere on the globe, regardless of the threat density environment. And so understanding what that is, I think that if we don't know that, that would limit the potential effectiveness. So it is sort of a team effort. But once we understand that, where it is, then we need to ensure that we have the ability to overcome whatever defenses and have the effect to give the president confidence that this option versus that option
One last question. These bunker buster things seems to be a good bomb to have. Do we have enough of them?
Senator, we were talking about that earlier, that what I am focused on is, one, given the nature of the targets that we know, we look at the inventory, but you've got to believe that after that, some people are thinking about how to make them more defensible.
Even more hardened,
so we're also looking about what's the next iteration. We need to stay ahead of them nonstop.
Thank you.
I'm going to address my last question to the pride of Bowling Green, Kentucky, General Saltzman. Obviously, here on Earth, we've seen our adversaries working more and more together. Are you seeing that in space? And if so, I'd be interested in your thoughts about that. And we all know the Chinese are very aggressively trying to go in that direction as well. What are the gaps in our own capabilities that worry you the most?
Well, first, let me tell you, the partnership that I see amongst the allies is tremendous. I've had the great opportunity over the last couple of years to host what we call the International Space Chiefs Conference. And it has grown from about 20 nations 3 years ago to there's so many that want to come now, we have to actually find a different facility to host all that are coming. We were about 44 invites last year. And so the interest in space, the interest in contributing to the security and stability of the space domain is growing internationally. Our most trusted allies are the ones that you could list off on your right hand. They have tremendous capabilities that we are working hard to make sure are integrated into our operational plans, into our force designs, so that we can get the most out of them. We have a thing called the Coalition Space Operations Initiative. 10 nations that get together twice a year to discuss infrastructures, policies, standards for interoperability. And it's had tremendous value across the coalition of like-minded nations for a secure and stable space environment. So very proud of what our allies have been able to do with U.S. leadership in the space domain. And the PRC is worrisome, sir. The ISR capabilities, the space-enabled targeting that they've been able to achieve from space has increased the range and accuracy of their weapon systems to the point where getting anywhere close enough in the Western Pacific to be able to achieve military objectives is in jeopardy if we can't deny, disrupt, degrade that ISR capability. That's the most pressing challenge, and that means the Space Force needs the space control, counter space capabilities in order to deny that kill web.
Senator Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And lest I be misunderstood, having questions about the durability of the military efforts to degrade Iran's nuclear enrichment capability should not be misunderstood as a lack of enthusiasm and support for the professionalism and skill with which airmen carried out a very difficult mission. So let me join many of my colleagues of both parties who've congratulated the Air Force on carrying out a difficult mission well. If I could, General Allvin and Secretary Meink, much is made of the Chinese Navy. It's often discussed in hearings, but frankly, it's the Chinese Air Force and Missile Force and their increasing and sophisticated capabilities in space that present, I think, the most serious challenge we face in terms of capabilities. The Air Force has progressed fairly rapidly through development of the F-47, and I'd just be interested, given the critical time window, how the Air Force is working with industry to ensure that both programs, F-47 and the collaborative combat aircraft, are fielded on time, hopefully even ahead of schedule, and how confident are you in industry's ability to deliver and on the supply chains needed to do that, given our previous discussion about the F-35?
Well, thank you, Senator, for that. I will tell you that this is, when we look at the programs you're referencing, the F-47 and collaborative combat aircraft are both part of what we call the Next Generation Air Dominance family of systems. We approach that fundamentally different from where we approach our other fifth-generation platforms, F-35, F-22, and the Secretary referred to it. Those were a different time when we sort of outsourced not only the contract to the contractors, we actually outsourced some of the intellectual property, some of the engineering. We have insourced that back in. We have gained knowledge parity, and we have the engineering expertise within our United States Air Force. Now, we knew as much about the designs as all the competitors did when they were feeding into that. The second is this government reference architecture to where we have sort of control over the mission systems. That does a couple things. That lets a lot more of industry play in. So while we still have our prime contractors, if there are other innovative companies that have the opportunity to participate and add in new things in, we control whether that happens or not along with the contractor. So we have taken back some of that control. So there's more agility in the way that we can leverage those mission systems and move the program at the pace that we desire rather than the contractor. And I think that is fundamentally how we're going to start doing all of our acquisitions, gaining more of that control back to ensure that the government has more flexibility in the way that it moves the programs forward. And Secretary, you've been doing this for much longer than me, so your thoughts?
Yeah, captured it very well. You know, these are some of the most complicated systems humans produce. So we need to keep our eye on the ball. Execution, execution, execution. I think the contract is structured really well for many of the things that the general just walked through. Now we need to make sure we execute, we keep a stable funding profile, and make sure we deliver these capabilities, because they are critical, as is the CCA.
Well, thank you. As your written testimony makes perfectly clear, a timely authorization and appropriation, full-year appropriations, a close consultation between the department and this subcommittee and the full committee is absolutely critical for our sending signals to industry, for your being able to deliver on what that agility now will mean, and for our being able to, whether in space and information or in air dominance, actually be able to meet this moment, because the PRC certainly isn't ever operating on a continuing resolution and doesn't have disconnects. They're executing, and we need to meet this and meet it in a timely way. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the second round, and thank you all for your testimony and your service.
Thank you all for coming and for your service. We're members of the subcommittee will have a week to submit additional questions for the record. Senators may submit additional written questions, and we ask that you respond to those questions within 30 days of receiving them. Subcommittee now stands in recess, subject to the call of the chair.